It was a cold, moonless night when Jack, a middle-aged cab driver with salt and pepper hair, sat in his yellow taxi, waiting for his next passenger. The streets of the city were eerily quiet, save for the occasional distant sirens and the sound of his engine idling. Jack had seen his fair share of strange passengers, but nothing could have prepared him for what was about to unfold. Just as Jack was starting to doze off, a tall figure approached the cab. Jack adjusted his rearview mirror and saw a man in a tattered overcoat, his face hidden in the shadows of a wide-brimmed hat. The stranger opened the back door and got in without a word. "Where to?" Jack asked, trying to sound friendly despite his unease. The man's voice was a low, raspy whisper that sent shivers down Jack's spine. "Take me to the countryside, far away from the city, to a place where there's nothing but silence." Jack hesitated for a moment but then nodded, assuming the man was seeking solace in the tranquility of the countryside. He put the cab in gear and began to drive out of the city, heading towards the remote, desolate areas where few dared to venture. As they left the city lights behind, the darkness outside grew oppressive, broken only by the occasional flicker of headlights from oncoming vehicles. The silence in the cab was deafening, and Jack could feel the tension in the air. The strange passenger seemed to emanate an unsettling aura. Jack couldn't help but steal glances at him in the rearview mirror. The man's face remained hidden beneath the hat, and his features were obscured by the dim cabin light. Jack's unease deepened when he noticed that the man's reflection in the rearview mirror didn't quite match up with his own movements. It was as if the man's reflection lagged behind, moving out of sync with the physical world. Jack's heart pounded in his chest, but he kept his eyes on the road. The passengers' requests grew increasingly peculiar as they ventured deeper into the countryside. He asked Jack to turn off the headlights, plunging the cab into total darkness, and insisted on driving with the windows down, even though the chilly night air was biting. Jack obeyed, fearful of what might happen if he refused. They drove for what felt like hours, winding through narrow, deserted roads. The eerie silence of the night was broken only by the low hum of the engine and the sound of crickets in the distance. Jack's mind raced with questions, but he dared not speak. As they reached a desolate stretch of road that seemed to lead to nowhere, the passenger finally broke his silence. "Stop the cab here," he ordered, his voice more chilling than ever. Jack pulled over to the side of the road and came to a halt. The passenger opened the door and stepped out, disappearing into the darkness. Jack watched in horror as the man seemed to dissolve into thin air, leaving nothing but the faint echo of his eerie laughter. The cab driver's heart raced as he sat alone in the cab, the silence now unbearably. He couldn't explain what he had just witnessed. Was it a trick of the mind? Had he picked up a deranged hitchhiker? Just as Jack was considering leaving the area and putting the bizarre encounter behind him, he heard it. A low, guttural growl that seemed to emanate from the very depths of the earth. It was a sound unlike anything he had ever heard, and it sent a wave of terror through his body. The terrible noise continued to grow louder, morphing into a cacophony of otherworldly shrieks and wails. Jack felt his eardrums threaten to burst from the intensity of the sound. He desperately fumbled for the keys and tried to start the engine, but it refused to turn over. Panic set in as Jack realized he was trapped in the midst of this nightmarish symphony. He could see nothing beyond the reach of his headlights, but the eerie sound seemed to come from all directions. It was as if the very air itself was filled with malevolent spirits, howling in torment. The cab's interior began to vibrate violently, and Jack's vision blurred as the noise reached a deafening crescendo. He clutched his ears, trying to block out the tormenting sounds, but it was futile. He felt as though he was being pulled apart, his sanity unraveling in the face of this otherworldly onslaught. Just when it seemed that Jack could take no more, the noise abruptly stopped. The silence that followed was almost as unsettling as the cacophony that had preceded it. Jack cautiously released his grip on his ears and peered out of the window. To his horror, he saw the tattered overcoat of the strange passenger lying in the middle of the road, as if it had been discarded. The man himself was nowhere to be seen. Trembling, Jack opened the door and cautiously stepped out of the cab. Bending to inspect the abandoned overcoat, he turned to find the passenger's horrifying, contorted face locked onto him. Jack jolted awake, back in his parked cab, the night eerily silent. The passenger had vanished. As he drove back to the city, Jack carried the weight of a glimpse into an unfathomable world, forever changed by the twisted memory of the passenger's face.